has earned an unprecedented 18 Private Eye Writers of America. Well, I asked you to check this before. Okay.
Well, I wanted to do this to you.
All right. I have been corrected. Now it's up to, those 22 were, the 4 were just recent. Okay.
Yes.
A lot of nominations, any way you look at it. And those are for his Nathan Heller novels, True Detective and Stolen Away. His graphic novel, Road to Perdition, in 1998, is the basis of the Academy Award-winning 2002 film. His many comics credits include the syndicated strip Dick Tracy from 1977 to 1993, and his own Ms. Tree, the longest-running Private Eye comic book. His new book is Scarface and the Untouchable, Al Capone, Eliot Ness, and the Battle for Chicago. He's a graduate of the University of Iowa, and he lives not far from here in Muscatine, Iowa. Let's welcome Max.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me all right? Yeah. Thanks for not mentioning that I was made Grand Master of the Mystery Writers of America last year. That would have been too embarrassing. I don't like to, I don't like to rub that in. Before I came, my wife informed me that I'm supposed to read today, and I just assume not. I will if you want me to, but you can request that. But I just soon talk to you and maybe answer some questions. I can give you a little backstory before we get started. I am a graduate of the Writers Workshop here in Iowa City. I have an MFA, and was here in the, I guess it was the late 70s. I should start saying the 80s or 90s or something, but in fact it was the 70s. It was an interesting time because I, even then, had determined that I wanted to be a mystery writer, that I wanted to write crime and suspense fiction. In fact, I always thought I'd be able to go to the Writers Workshop, and I thought it'd be pretty easy to get in because, after all, I only lived about 35 miles away, so surely that should have given me the right to be in the workshop. So I applied, and I went to one afternoon, a couple of weeks out, went up to, from Muscatine, where I still live, and my wife and I had at that point, I think, were just recently married, and must have been 68, and I drove up and looked for Richard Yates, this mainstream writer who was in charge of the undergraduate workshop. There was one undergraduate workshop section. And I brought a book with me that I'd written. It was I think my 4th or 5th novel, but was the first one that I really felt had a possibility of being published. And so I found him in his office at the English and Philosophy building. I pushed my way through the Englishmen and the philosophers and got my way to the office. And he was a very kind of dour man with a dark beard. Kind of looked like like John Brown on one of his off days between burning down railroad stations or whatever. And so I told him who I was, and I was very bubbly. I was just like, I can't wait to be in the workshop, and I've got, here's my book, and I want to be the next Dashiell Hammett or Raymond Chandler or Mickey Spillane, and I just went on, and he just kind of listened patiently, and then he said, something like this. He said, I don't mean to discourage you, but we don't do that kind of thing at the Writers Workshop. You can leave your book, and I'll take a look at it. But we're serious about writing here. So I tucked my tail between my legs, went back to Muscatine, told my wife how humiliated I felt, and kind of saw my future drizzling off. And a couple of days later, the phone rang, and Barb answered it, and she came in, she said, "It's that Richard Yates." And I said, "Really? Did he think up some new mean things to say about me?" And so I got on the phone with him, and he said, "This is Richard Yates, and I'm calling to apologize." He said, I read your book. He said, "It's clear you're very serious about what you do. This is the most professional writing that was submitted to me by a country mile, and I would be honored to have you in my class." And then there was this long pause while I wondered if it was a prank call, and then he said, my wife and I watch Carol Burnett every week. And I thought, okay. He said, and we laugh and we laugh and we have such a wonderful time. And he said, it occurred to me that there's no shame in being an entertainer. And after that, he took me under his wing. He was my mentor, my great mentor here. He wasn't always my teacher because they rightly, and I got into the other workshop. Oh, I should tell you that story. That's an even better story. So I developed a novel working with Yates, a book called Bait Money, a crime novel, and I've been working with him all year. And I submitted it, complete novel, to the workshop. And then, I assumed I'd get in. This is the graduate workshop. So I went to the office, and on such things hinge a career. The secretary accidentally handed me, in addition to my manuscript, the evaluation of my manuscript. And the evaluation of the manuscript was by a graduate student who said almost exactly the same things about it that Yates had said to me the year before. Said to me, said, we don't do this kind of thing here at the workshop. If he wants to write this kind of thing, he can go out. He doesn't need our help. He can go out and do that himself. This is not the place for this kind of work. So I went to Richard Yates, and I handed him this, and I said, does this sound familiar to you? And he said, I'll take care of this. And he got himself, a guy named John Leggett, very good writer, who was the head of the workshop, and I think it was Seymour Krim, who was teaching at the workshop then, who was a very big writer in the area of the Beat generation. And I got the highest marks and got into the workshop, where I worked with Yates, and I worked with several other writers, including Walter Tevis, who wrote The Hustler, which is very much in my wheelhouse. And Richard Yates got me my first agent in New York. And while I was in the workshop, I sold 2 books that I had worked with Yates on. And I know that year I was the only writer in the workshop who sold a book. And I actually sold 2. So I like that story quite a bit. That's a good one. But it was an interesting time, though, because there really was, when I was in classes, there was often a group that thought what I was doing was terrific. It was a smaller group, but it was maybe a third of the class, and the others had their nose in the air to it, thought it was just junk. And I remember very vividly there was a class that we took, and I don't remember the name of it, but it was a class designed for the writers, the kids who were going to become professional writers theoretically, to read literature from a standpoint of social change, sociology, politics, whatever, to look at various books. And I forget what we were looking at, probably. It might have been The Great Gatsby, predictably. And great book, but predictably. And you got a lot of credit for this class. You got something like 8 hours of credit for this one class. And it was a long class. You'd go in there for 3.5 hours or something. So we were in class and talking about capitalism as reflected in literature. So I raised my hand and say, what would be a really good book for us to look at is Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett, which is a book about union busting in a town that is run by capitalists. And it was a very good suggestion, if I do say so myself. And they all looked at me as if I had passed wind, which is a polite way of saying as if I'd farted, right? So I thought, oh boy. And I think I've made my last suggestion for the reading list. And a couple of years later, just a couple of years later, I was in Iowa Book and Supply, and I happened to be there when they were getting ready to have classes. And I said, oh, well, there's that class I took. I don't know if it was the same teacher. I don't think it was, but it was that class. And on the shelf was Red Harvest. I think The Big Sleep, and probably the Maltese Falcon. But anyway, I looked there and like, boy, did I miss it by by 2-3 years. But I really was there right before that material, that what we now call noir and what we then called hard-boiled material, was taken seriously, and that people understood that Dashiell Hammett was a major American writer, and you don't get too many arguments about that anymore. You certainly don't get any about Chandler. But I was a bit of, I would say a gadfly if I knew exactly what gadfly meant, but I'm not quite sure I know. But I know I think it must have grown out of the way I squeaked into the workshop. I consistently, thumb my nose at these things I was supposed to like and to do. And I know, for example, there was a class about where you were supposed to compare a novel to the film version. For example, Pride and Prejudice in the film version. So I did Kiss Me Deadly by Mickey Spillane in the film version. Now, as the irony here is that today, Kiss Me Deadly, the film, is considered to be one of the great noir films. Then it was just something that showed up on TV late at night, very late at night. And I mean, this is before VCRs. I didn't have a copy of it. I had to write about it from memory. So I wrote about that. And a sort of pattern began to appear, which is that the teacher really enjoyed it because it was so out of what everybody else was doing, because everybody else was trying to impress the teacher, and I was trying to thumb my nose at the teacher, which impressed the teacher because I've been a teacher, you get bored reading the same papers over and over again and over and over again. Well, for the workshop, my graduate year, you had to do not a thesis, but you had to do a paper on a major American author. Anyone care to guess what author I did? I did Mickey Spillane. And everybody else was doing Hemingway, and they were doing F. Scott Fitzgerald, and so on and so forth. I don't even know if they get away with Hemingway today, but at any rate, the instructor, and this was Seymour Krim, he came up to me and he shook my hand. He said, "Thank you so much, because I was getting so desperately bored reading these papers, and I had so much fun reading what you wrote." And so, sometimes I think it does help to swim against the tide a little bit. But it's been, so I've had this kind of a love-hate relationship with the workshop. I love it, they hate me. But it was a really good experience for me, and working with a mainstream writer, a fine literary writer like Richard Yates, I learned so much from him. And he, there are specific things that to this day I use that he taught me. I mentioned we had a little panel earlier, and I mentioned that he talked to me about, because I was really writing replicas of the novels I had grown up loving and reading, which a lot of writers, so should you do. But, so I was writing, I guess you'd say, kind of standard bad guy, good guy stuff. And he said to me, you need to be reflecting on that everyone is a victim. Oh, okay. And the bad guys don't know they're the bad guys. Oh, that's interesting. And that opened up the whole world of fiction to me, of looking at it in a more mature way. There's one I remember, and I know this line is still in this book. It was published. But I had a line where there was a fight where the line was something like, he broke the bottle off on the edge of the table and came at me like a tough guy in a B movie. And Yates said to me, you pointing that out doesn't make it any less a moment in a B movie. I've always remembered that. So, so that's my background. As I say, I grew up and still live in Muscatine, Iowa, and I grew up wanting to do comics. I wanted to be a cartoonist. And it was during that period in the late 50s and early 60s when there were a lot of mystery shows on TV, Perry Mason and Peter Gunn and 77 Sunset Strip and all that. There was a big craze. And I started reading, a lot of these were based on books. You know, there's the Earl Stanley Gardner books that Perry Mason was based on. There was a Thin Man TV show, so that led me to Dashiell Hammett. There was Mike Hammer with Darren McGavin that led me to Mickey Spillane, because I always was somebody who wanted to read either the book the movie or TV show was based on, or the history that the movie or TV show was on. I wanted to see this. I don't know why. I was attracted to the source material, and so I got very interested in the private eye genre and trying to write it, and the drawing. I had an interest in comics, but the drawing kind of just fell off to one side. And so by the time I was 12 or 13, I was starting to write these replica novels that I was sending out. And I'd done, I think, 4 of them by the time I graduated from high school. Very happy that none of them were published. But you know, that's how I went to school, and that's how I taught myself to write. And that's why Richard Yates took me seriously, and because I was very dogged about it, that I really wanted to do this and to do it well. And so my first several books were published, and a book, I had basically done for my thesis at the University of Iowa Writers' Workshop 3 novels that were set in the same small Iowa town, fictional town called Port City, which was based on Muscatine. And the thesis of it was, which seems almost quaint now, the idea was that I could take this small town city and do a crime or mystery story there. Because at that time, this kind of mystery story was always New York or it was always LA, Hollywood, LA. And the whole sort of regional mystery thing hadn't really kicked in yet. And so I was a little ahead of the curve on that. So they were not related to each other except in the setting. All 3 of those books sold. I think the third one, Quarry, maybe I'd only written half of it at that time, but it sold about a year or so later. So my career was off the ground. I did teach for a while, and the big career break I had was the Dick Tracy comic strip. I had loved the strip as a kid. It had absolutely been my favorite. It absolutely was what pointed me toward mystery fiction and mystery stories and detective stories. And my mother, when I was 7 and about to be 8, wrote the creator of Dick Tracy, Chester Gould, and sent him drawings I'd done of Dick Tracy and things I'd written about Dick Tracy. And Gould himself wrote me a letter with a picture he drew of Dick Tracy and sent it to me that I got on my 8th birthday. I've never been right since. I have never been right since. So I then wrote him, and I corresponded with him for a little while, and one of the things I said to him was, and when you get tired of doing the strip, I'd be glad to do it for you. I haven't changed much. In 1970, I actually got to know him after my books came out, because I sent them to him to say, look, remember me? And I did do this. I did stick with it, and I did do books. And so I began to meet with him. I used to go to his office at the Tribune Tower, and he'd tell me, and we'd go out to lunch, and he'd tell me what the next Dick Tracy story was going to be. Oh, amazing, amazing. Even now, it's amazing to me. So in 1977, I remember I went to talk to him, and he didn't know what the next story was going to be, which I thought was very odd. And then I found out that he was getting ready to retire. And it's hard to believe that I was friends with him and he had nothing to do with it, but the fact is he didn't. The guy at the Tribune Syndicate called me and gave me an opportunity to try out for the strip. They were having a talent hunt. I was going to be one of half a dozen people who were asked to do a sample story. And I said, how did you know about me? Well, they had found out about me from my agent. They had found out about me from a guy from another comic syndicate where I had submitted something that they almost bought but didn't buy. And so it wasn't Chester Gould. So at that time, I thought, well, this is a newspaper strip. I need to show them that I'm fast and good. So I got the phone call, and that night I wrote the story, which was about 15 or 20 page synopsis. And we, the next day, sent it, this will date me, special delivery, because there wasn't anything else. So they had it in like 2 or 3 days. And they were like, holy cow, this guy got this thing to us this fast. And so within a couple of days, I got a call, could you come to Chicago and talk to us? And they met with me in a hotel. I have a bunch of vivid memories about this meeting, but one of them, and I can't explain it, it's apropos of nothing, but we were sitting in this hotel room, and at one point a mouse ran across the, what I thought. Maybe it portended the kind of money I was going to get paid. So they're talking to me about Dick Tracy strip and what I had done, the story I'd done, and they're talking, and I don't know if you've ever had a job interview where you are there for the job and you start to get the feeling that maybe you have the job. And I realized that they were not asking me what I would do with Dick Tracy, but what I was going to do with Dick Tracy. And so that was pretty exciting. They offered me the job. I obviously took it, and we ate at McDonald's on the way home. Remember, Barb? To celebrate. And so that was, and then a few days later, I got a call from Chester Gould. I understand that congratulations are in order. I said, yeah, it's crazy, Chet. And he said, well, he was really happy that it was staying in Midwestern hands. He didn't want any of those New York or Hollywood people getting him. And so then for 15 years, I did the Dick Tracy strip. I wrote it, had 2 different artists, both of whom had been Gould's assistants. And it went very well. We did the Dick Tracy movie in 1990. I was involved a little bit with that, and it was very exciting. It was something it really was a dream come true. It was crazy to have that happen. But what happens a lot in publishing, and if you go to these meetings, you are going to find out. You're going to find out that there's not much talk about the business end of this, but it's a business. And when you have publishers, one of the things that happens all the time is some editor buys your work and loves it, and then you get a phone call that the editor isn't at the house anymore. And they're still going to publish it, but not with a lot of enthusiasm. And they're not going to probably publish any more things by you. So that's a thing, that's a phone call that authors just fear, because they're going to have a good relationship with an editor, and then suddenly that editor's gone. And the editor got fired for some reason, so the new editor isn't really keen to tie his or her wagon to your dropping star. So at some point toward the end, I got a new editor at Chicago Tribune, and he hated me. And I tried very hard to please this guy, and then one day, it's hard for you to imagine this, I know, but he was on the phone with me, and I blew. I really blew. And my wife was going by my office at home, and she looked and she said, I'll be going down and applying at the bank. Because she had worked at the bank. She says, they'll take me back to the bank, I think. And so I called my agent and said, I've lost Dick Tracy. And he said, well, I hate to tell you this, but I just found out that you lost your Nate Heller contract too at Bantam, because I was doing my Nate Heller series at Bantam. And so the next morning, how old would Nathan have been? You think, if this is 93, you'd been about 5? About 10? 10. Okay, so I'm sleeping the next morning, and my son wakes me up. Dad, good news. They broke into our car and stole all your tapes and your tape player. And bad news comes in 3, right? So it's all over now, you know. And I'm like, thank you, son. That's good. I never knew. Did you put him up to that? Okay. So anyway, I was really blessed because I had a couple of good friends. One of them was a guy named Ed Gorman, who was from Cedar Rapids, one of Iowa's best writers, certainly one of Iowa's best mystery suspense writers. We were good friends. Ed was doing a lot of anthologies at the time. And he and a guy named Marty Greenberg called me up. They knew about this, and they said, write us some short stories. So for about 6 months I wrote, because I had no income. So I wrote short stories for about 6 months for them while I tried to get my ducks in a row. I looked that up what that meant one time. That's a terrible, look that up, it's horribly scary what ducks in a row means. I'm not gonna tell you. But at any rate, that's how I stayed alive. I stayed alive writing short stories for about 6 months. And then we placed Nate Heller elsewhere. I had a couple comic books I was working on, and I got things back on track. But the major thing that happened, and this, again, remember I said how things can hinge on, a career can hinge on something really small? I went to a comic book convention in San Francisco, actually Oakland. And an editor from DC wanted to talk to me, and I had already been doing some stuff at DC. And he said, we're going to do a series of noir graphic novels. And you're the only actual mystery writer. This isn't true now, but at the time it was. You're the only mystery writer who also writes comics. So we want to make sure you're part of this program. So he said, do you have any ideas for a graphic novel? I did not. But I said, absolutely. Well, let's hear it. So off the top of, I swear to God, off the top of my head, I pitched Road to Perdition. And it came from 2 things. One was a series of Japanese movies based on a manga called Lone Wolf and Cub, which was about a traveling samurai who pushed his little baby in a baby cart that was full of weapons that would be, it's terribly bloody. I showed the movies to my son when he was about 7, so I should be arrested. But now it's a translator of Japanese to English, so it all worked out. So anyway, so you have this, I have that in my mind, and then also there was this guy in the Quad Cities in Rock Island named John Looney. John Looney was this gangster who had a crazy son, and he was a very colorful gangster. He had a newspaper that he would literally go out, and when some farmer would come to town to put his money in the bank, they have a prostitute run up and put her arm around him. They take a picture of him, and then they charge him, $500 or $1,000 not to have his picture in the paper. Kind of the opposite of what they do in nightclubs and things. He was just he ran the town, and his son was a homicidal maniac. And so, for some reason, that stuck with me. I had turned that up in research for my Nathan Heller series. The first book was set in 1931, but that stuff, and I ran across this in the research, but that stuff hadn't happened. That happened in like the late teens, early 20s. So it didn't make it into my book, True Detective, which was the first Nathan Heller book. So anyway, I just sat there with this editor, and for some reason, my brain put those 2 things together. Because I said, well, and I actually said to him, you're familiar with Lone Wolf and Cub? He said, yes. Well, what if it was the 1920s or the 1930s, and it wasn't the shogun that the samurai had his conflict with, but the Godfather was with Al Capone or somebody like that, and he's like this. He's the hitman who works for Al Capone. So I just pitched it off the top of my head. Great. And then I said, and I have a title, Gun and Son. And he said, that's the worst title I've ever heard in my life. So, well, I'll see if I can come up with something else. And I did. Road to Perdition. And now the other funny thing about Road to Perdition is they hooked me up with this British artist who's really, really terrific. But the British artist was very slow. And I mean very slow. So that and what I would do is I would do 40 or 50, it was a 300-page work. It was going to be 300 pages. So I would do 40 pages, 40, 50 pages of script and send them in and forget all about it. And then I get a phone call from the editor saying, we need more script. More script for what? Road to Perdition. I go, oh yeah, Road to Perdition. And so I'd write another 50 pages. This went on for 3 or 4 years. And this book, which was sold at a comic book convention in 1993 because I got fired from Dick Tracy, came out in 1998. And again, these things, these small things that can hinge. As it happens, the publisher of DC Comics was a guy named Paul Levitz, who I was friendly with. He wasn't my pal. We didn't go to camp together. I just knew him from meeting him at comics conventions as, in passing. Nice guy. Well, I heard that during this time that it took for my artist to complete Road to Perdition, the graphic novel noir line had time to fail. So it failed. And we were going to be the last one published. So they canceled us. I could keep my money, but we're not going to publish it. So I called Levitz and said, Paul, I think that's my best work in comics. Please, please publish it. I said, take a look at it. And so, God bless him, he said, you know, you're right, we should do the last book. We announced that we'll do it. So by just the grace of Paul Levitz, that book got published. And of course, that, as you may know, became a big movie. I did some novels and so on, and so is there a lesson to be learned here? Hard work and luck. But you got to have a lot of hard work for the luck to be able to kick in. And because God smiles, but not frequently. Not frequently. My career, and I've been doing this, the first book was published in like late 72, sold in 71, has been, it's a struggle. When you're a freelancer, it's a struggle. And you never know where the next gig is coming from. And one of the hardest things that I've had to do in recent years, as I've gotten a little older and had a few health problems, I've had to learn to say no. And that's hard because it becomes almost hardwired in you to take on anything that's offered. But it's not a good thing. You have to learn to do at least a little picking and choosing. One of the things I did during the period where I had lost Dick Tracy, and because Dick Tracy was, I would work on it 1 day a week. That was it. And I got a nice paycheck for it. It was a great gig. And now I didn't have that paycheck. So I started I had done the movie novelization of the Dick Tracy movie. Remember the Warren Beatty Dick Tracy movie? I had done that, and it did really well, and which is kind of funny. I'll tell you another funny sidebar story. I went after that because I was doing Dick Tracy then. I had a very proprietary feeling about the comic strip. So my agent went after it. And they said, well, we'll only give you $2,500 to do it, which was about 25% of what the going rate was for that kind of project. I said, I don't care, I want to do it. Well, my agent sneaked past a royalty past them. Then they sold 800,000 copies. And then we paid my parents back so that we owned our house. And I don't have a house payment. I haven't had a house payment since 1993. Feel free to hate me. So anyway, so I had done this one very successful novelization. but then I went back about my business, and Dick Tracy, and all. Dick Tracy leaves, so I call my agent and say, I had a successful novelization, make it known that I'm available. And so I did for about 15 years, 20 years, did quite a few what are called movie and TV tie-ins. And that's a combination of novelizations of film scripts, and then also sometimes original novels based on TV shows. So for a long time, I did the CSI novels. I did some NYPD novels. I did Dark Angel, Criminal Minds. What a horrible show. That is the most misogynist nonsense I have ever run across. But the books are pretty good. So anyway, that was part of how I kept things afloat while I wrote what I call my real novels, which is nice. So, but I'm really not doing much of that, and not really anything at all of that. But that was part of it. So I guess what I'm trying to suggest, because sometimes I get beaten up sometimes because I have written so much. But does a plumber get beaten up for fixing a sink? Too many sinks. 10 sinks is art. 100 sinks is it's horrible that you would do that. Well, I've not had an honest job since. Well, if you count, it depends where you count the teaching I did, which was kind of sketchy. So I always say I haven't had an honest job since I sat groceries in Muscatine, Iowa, and bus tables. Those were the two honest jobs I had. So it's been a lifetime of avoiding real work. And let me tell you, the thing about the arts is it's a really hard place to make a living, but it's so gratifying. To be able to be paid for what is essentially your hobby is just, I feel like I'm blessed beyond belief. I'm perfectly happy to have more luck and have more wonderful things happen to me, but honestly, it's been a hard but just wonderful, wonderful life. Now, among the things I've done in recent years, one of the most successful things I've done, I can't take all the credit for. And even I am not small enough to take all the credit for this. But my wife, Barb, it always sounds like you have several other wives, doesn't it? Right? And there's my wife, Julie. There's my wife, Dot. No, I have only one wife. I did it right the first time. And she began writing a very odd situation. I was doing a comic book called Mystery, and I had this little thing in the back called a minute mystery. Have you ever seen those things that are, it's like 2 pages or 1 page? And Terry Beatty, my artist on Mystery, and I were doing those. And then we began doing something called Wild Dog for DC Comics. Wild Dog is now on the show Arrow. I've never watched it, but I'm told my character's on this TV show. I've got better things to do than watch that show. So I went to Barb, and she had been doing something as a preliminary thing. I think I was writing the scripts out, and she was turning the scripts into a typed version to save me time. And I said, do you think there's any chance you could do a short story version of this week's, this issue? And she said, I'll take a try. And so she writes a two-page story. It must have been the equivalent of maybe 4 typewritten pages, double-spaced. And I read it, and I said, this is really good. This is a little too damn good. She had it. I could tell she'd been reading me and editing me for years, and imagine what she'd be doing today if she were married to a brain surgeon. So when the Dick Tracy movie happened, I think I was co-editing an anthology of Dick Tracy short stories. So I said, take a crack at one, and she did, and it was really good. And the co-editor I had was this guy, Marty Greenberg, and he started using her on short stories, and she started writing short stories, and really good ones. I mean, really, really good ones. And so and then we had a funny thing happen where she got to a story she'd written she written this story, and I said, honey, because I then became her editor. So, honey, you've skipped a scene. If you're a writer, if you're any kind of writer in here, you know all about skipping scenes. You know all about writing around that scene. You just don't want to have to write, or you don't know how to write, so you just kind of try to finesse it. I said, you got to have that scene in there. It's not going to work without that scene. And she said, you write it then. And I said, well, I'll write it, but then you got to put my name on it with yours. She didn't care. So now we had a story together. Kind of worked really kind of good. And so we started occasionally writing stories together. We then did 2 novels together because short stories pay for similar money to I was getting with the grocery bagging and the busing tables. And so we did 2 novels that were standalones. And then I got a call. This all kind of is one story now that I think about it. The editor that I had sold Nathan Heller to after the one company dropped me was this wonderful gal named Michaela Hamilton. And when she left that company, I lost one of my editors. Now here's the good side of that. She called me and said, I'm doing mysteries at Kensington. Could you do something for me? I said, well, yeah, I'd love to do something for you. And she said, I got to warn you, we do cozies. We do not do this tough, hard-boiled noir stuff. We do cozies. No problem. I hadn't read a cozy in my life. Agatha Christie is not cozy. Trust me, that woman was a lot of things, but she was not cozy. So Barb and I sat down and we put something together, and we thought it was pretty good. And I think it did have a mother and daughter combo in it. And we sent it in, and she said, oh, you don't understand. Here's what I need. I need a cute pet. I need an exotic setting. I need a gimmick. I need an older woman, and I need a younger woman. So I'm writing this down. So Barb and I sit down, kind of torqued off about this, and I say, well, so we together come up with, well, we had at the time a diabetic dog who was blind and diabetic. So I said, okay, the cute pet will be a blind diabetic dog. The exotic setting will be Muscatine, Iowa, which we called Serenity. The gimmick will be antiquing, because we like to antique, but we're not going to do, the big high-end antiquing. We're going to do dumpster diving. We're going to do garage sales. We're going to do flea markets. We're going to do the low-end thing that actual human beings do. They don't go to, what are these places? Sheffield's, or I don't know what they're called. They're some British thing. Sotheby's, yeah. Christie's. No, real people don't do that. So, and then we made the young woman a young divorcee who's come home with her tail tucked between her legs because she's screwed up and she got herself divorced because she cheated on her husband at the 10-year class reunion. And the mother is a local theatrical diva who's bipolar, because Barb's mother is nuts. Because Barb's mother has mental problems. So there was that. And of course, that's drawing on your own life, which is really smart. And so we wrote this thing, a couple of chapters, and we really liked it, but we knew, because again, it's that thumbing your nose thing, we knew there was no chance that she'd like it, because we had done such a subversive thing with all of the things we're supposed to put in the book. Then I got an email that was the best acceptance letter I ever got. This is the whole email. More. And so we sold that. How many have we done? We're on the 14th one now. The first book is called Antiques Roadkill. So anyway, are we done? Am I done? Are you kicking me out of here?
You're only done if there are no questions, but we'd like to leave a little time for Q&A.
I'm fine with questions. I've been blathering. I have been blathering, but that was more fun than reading. Oh, well, I guess I should talk about the book that you're here for. Let me talk about this first. Scarface and the Untouchable, Al Capone, Eliot Ness, and the Battle for Chicago. A title so long, I have to read it to you. This is a nonfiction book. It's written with A. Brad Schwartz, that's A. Brad Schwartz. I told him, I said, you may be A. Brad Schwartz, but I'm the Max Allan Collins. So Brad is a young fan, who had been a young fan of mine who loved my Nathan Heller. What's that?
Just make it short.
I will.
You don't have much time.
No, I just real quick. I'll be real quick.
Thank you for your help there.
But he was a young fan of mine who loved the Nathan Heller books. The Nathan Heller books, which are all based on true crimes. And he loved the Eliot Ness stuff, and he was a Dick Tracy fan, and I had found out from Chester Gould that he based Dick Tracy on Eliot Ness, which was a very interesting little historical footnote. So I did all this stuff in my fiction about Ness and Capone and that era. And basically what happened was Brad said, you've done all this research, you got to do the actual a nonfiction book on the subject, because you can do the definitive book with all this research. And so he and I came together, and we did this book, which is something like 700, and I don't know, it's very long. Covers Ness and Capone, their lives up to the end of the Chicago years. Now, what happened was we were going to do Cradle to Grave with them, and we got to 150,000 words, and we were at the end of Chicago. So I said, let's make this the book about Chicago. And we are now working on the rest of their lives, which is mostly Eliot Ness in Cleveland, where he was public safety director. The book is getting really, really good reviews, and is selling well, and I'm really proud of it. And it really is kind of like the sum total of everything that I've done where Eliot Ness is concerned. In this, we find out all kinds of stuff about him that nobody knew. Did you know that Ness and Capone, for a long time, lived on the same street? Did you know that Eliot Ness lied about his age on his application blank to the feds? The most honest detective of all time lied, or that Capone's mob basically conspired with the federal agents to put him away, so that everything could be settled down in Chicago before the World's Fair started. Ladies and gentlemen, it's all right here. And more. Okay.
All right, thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Okay, because we're recording here at the library, I'll try to
Oh my
get the
God,
mic
this is
to
going to
you.
catch up with me.
So if there's any questions, let's go ahead.
You guys are really patient with me. I have to
Harry.
congratulate you on that.
When you're writing or drawing Dick Tracy, were you the one that put the Apple Watch on him?
Well, I put but I did invent, so to speak, the two-way wrist computer. I mean, I turned it into, I upgraded it, and I think that's basically what became the Apple thing. So yeah, that to some
So
degree,
you
yes.
collected-
But I don't draw. I did design most of the villains that were so my cartooning did get a little bit into that.
So are you collecting royalties from Apple?
Royalties are mostly imaginary thing I've learned over my career. Not true, but no. Thank you, sir. There's somebody
Anyone
back
else?
there too. Keep this guy moving.
Just short questions so we can get everybody in.
Oh, I hope so. Would you talk about Mickey Spillane, how you met him, working with him, and his
Well, that's
ongoing
another
legacy? I
panel.
know. Say in 50 words or less.
All right, I just say that Mickey was my idol as a young man that was really sparked me in wanting to write mystery novels. There's some wonderful stories that I don't have time to tell, but we did become friends in his later life, and we did a bunch of projects together. I did a documentary about him that he cooperated with me on. We did a comic book series together, and he's my son Nathan's godfather. And toward the end of his life, I got a phone call. Well, he had unfortunately, he had pancreatic cancer, and he knew his time was limited. And he was working on a Mike Hammer that he designed as the last Mike Hammer novel. And he called me, he said, if I don't get this finished, would you finish it for me? I said, I don't want to, but there'd be no greater honor. He then went to his wife, Jane Spillane, and said, when I'm gone, there's going to be a treasure hunt around here. Take everything you find and give it to Max. He'll know what to do. And for various reasons, some of it having to do with the fact that at a certain point he became a Jehovah's Witness, and his church did not like the way he wrote. They agreed with a lot of critics, I guess. And so he had a ton of Mike Hammer stories and other stories, novels, that he had begun but not finished, for whatever reason walked away from. There are a bunch of reasons, but that's one of them, is this internal and external problem he had with his church. So I began with half a dozen manuscripts of over 100 pages. And I have now done, I think I'm up to 10 novels. I'm working on one now. And, well, more than that, because there were 13 Mike Hammer novels written and published during his lifetime. And with the one I'm working on now, plus the short story collection of shorter things that I completed, we will have doubled the number of books. It'll be 26 books. Don't know if we'll go any farther than that, but I've pretty much, I had a drawer, file drawer of Spillane material, unbelievable of an author of his fame for there to be that much stuff. And one of the greatest things for me is that I will have these reviews who say they can't tell who wrote what, and often they quote 2 lines. I mean, different lines, different books, but I'll look and I go, oh, Mickey wrote that line. Oh, I wrote that one. So that's great. It's been so much fun for me, and it's been so gratifying to me. This is the current one. I don't even know if it's for sale up here, but this is called Killing Town. It's the 100th anniversary, centenary of Mickey's birth. And Killing Town is the first Mike Hammer story that he began but never finished. He began it in like 1945. I finished it last year. I actually co-wrote the first Mike Hammer story and the last Mike Hammer story. So yeah. So I got to, I wanted to be Chester Gould and Mickey Spillane when I grew up. And I wanted to marry a beautiful blonde. It all happened. It all happened.
So, you've obviously studied Eliot Ness and Al
Yeah.
Capone in the past. Doing this book, what sort of changes did it bring about in how you view some of what you thought you knew?
Well, Ness is a fascinating character because he is both exactly what you think he was and not at all what you think he was, because he was, for example, he often would not carry, he would often have an empty shoulder holster when he went on a raid. He hated guns. And he very rarely wore a gun. That's certainly not Robert Stack or Kevin Costner's version of Ness. What happened with Ness is that he was at the end of his life. He'd had some successes, very good first couple of acts in his life. Toward the end, he left law enforcement and government and went into business, and he did not have good success in business. And so, toward the end of his life, he collaborated with a sports writer named Oscar Freire on the book The Untouchables. He wrote some memoir material for Freire and handed his scrapbooks over to Freire. Ness died before the book came out. He actually objected to the way the book glorified him, he felt. One of our discoveries has been that the book really is quite accurate. It's just that Fraley put things in different order to make things play better. So there are a lot of things he did as a federal agent before the Untouchables were formed that Fraley moves to the Untouchables period. So this TV movie is made, 2-part TV movie is made with Robert Stack as Eliot Ness. Not a pilot. It's supposed to be just a one-shot, and it explodes. It's huge. So they turn around to make this TV show. But the problem is they used up the book on the TV show. So Capone goes to prison at the end of the original show. So they began having Eliot Ness chase Ma Barker, Mad Dog Call, Waxy Gordon, you name, and then a lot of fictional criminals. So for the next 3 or 4 years the show is on, he's glorified beyond belief as a real Dick Tracy, with the Walter Winchell narration making it seem like it's a documentary on this date and that date, and you know where they're pulling those dates from, right? So what happens is, you have to kind of remember that this is 1959, and the Untouchables were really operating in the early 30s. It's not that long ago. It's not that long ago. So there's a lot of his contemporaries, Ness's contemporaries, who are still alive. And they're going around saying, well, this guy was not that big a deal. What are they talking about? And so that began getting into the nonfiction books, where the nonfiction books talk about what a fraud he was. Now, he never did that himself. But when you go back and see what he did during the Capone years, and when you go back and look at what he did in Cleveland later, where he did all kinds of stuff, he's the real deal. And so that's what we have tried to do, is go back to the primary sources and really give you what really, really happened. And as is often the case, as I have found when I do research for my Nathan Heller books, the Hollywood stuff is just lazy. The real stuff is really more interesting and more exciting often than what Hollywood makes up. Whatever you think of David Mamet, that script is just ridiculously lazy. Do you think you can change a jury in the middle of a trial? Do you think that if you legally bought rum in Canada that the Mounties would chase you? Do you think that Eliot Ness threw Frank Nitti off a rooftop? I mean, it's just ridiculously stupid. Exciting movie, though, you know. It's a good movie. I mean, I enjoyed that movie, but I grit my teeth through a lot of it. So we wanted to, and Capone, too, has been misrepresented in many ways. So we wanted to have this, we wanted to do what we hope is, at least to date, the definitive version, and not just, I tell you, one of the lies about him that just has been told again and again is that he was a press hound, and that he would call the press up to be there when he was doing his raids, showing him with an axe and all this stuff. And this is, you can find any number of nonfiction books that state this. We went back. Guess what? Those photos don't exist. None of those exist. They didn't even know who Ness and the Untouchables were until until Capone was arrested, and then the people above Ness began to pump some publicity in. So anyway, it's a really exciting story, and the idea was to do it, make it read like a novel, but be true. So I'll shut up now.
We can continue the conversation out at the book table. Let's hear it from Allan Collins.
Thanks for being patient.